Welcome to Amazing Indiana Music Stories.
My name is Tom Roznowski, and this is my Amazing Indiana Music Story. I was born in Syracuse, New York. Tom Cruise was born there. So was Grace Jones. And I was raised in Albany, New York, the capital city. My dad moved there because he had a civil service job. And went to school there through college, upstate New York, worked there for a couple of years, and then eventually migrated out to Indiana. I was playing with a childhood friend of mine, music, and he wound up at Indiana University and invited me out here. So we played music. He eventually left town. I stayed. So here I am.
Were you exposed to music or storytelling through your family or community while growing up?
Yeah. I was the first child of two only children. Both my parents were only children. So they allowed me a lot of latitude as a kid. And my grandfather, both my grandfathers were involved in what I do. One, my mother's father died before I was born, but he was a musician. He used to play the baritone horn, which was kind of a modified small tuba in the community band. Had a uniform and everything, marching band, I guess. And my other grandfather, my dad's father, was a wonderful storyteller and used to keep me entertained a lot by his observations. So I started telling stories and playing music at a fairly early age. I grew up in parochial school, K through 12. The nuns taught me how to play piano. And the nuns taught me how to write, too. I had a column in the high school paper. So between those two expressions, I started to cultivate a real love of story, whether it was through writing songs or putting it in other forms of media. And yeah, I had some good childhood experiences that led me along that way. I used to tell stories in front of my class, sort of extemporaneously. And I remember when I was a little kid, I won a first prize at a museum. They had a summer festival, and they asked kids to support the festival by submitting designs for hats, creative designs for hats. And I took these wire coat hangers and I twisted them up so they were kind of a maze, and then I stuck a couple little toy cars in there, and I called it Highway of the Future, and I won first prize. It was great. I got my name in the paper and everything. Huh. So yeah, that was encouraging. So yeah, I was lucky. Agatha Christie says the most fortunate thing that can happen to you in your life is to have a good childhood. I did. I was very lucky.
So it sounds like there were many points throughout your life that kind of led to the path you've taken. Were there any moments that really stood out from maybe your teenage years that kind of helped cement direction?
Well, yeah, I was an altar boy, and used to do the Latin Mass, so I had to memorize that. And it was nice. I liked the ritual of it, but it was also essentially being on stage and remembering your lines and hitting your light and hitting your marks and memorizing what to do, both in terms of your movement and the lines you were delivering. So that was good training. And then in high school, that was probably junior high, I was in a production of The Merchant of Venice. Shakespeare. It was the first time I'd ever gotten exposed to that. And played the judge. It was a speaking part. Nice experience. So, yeah, I remember those things. Of course, I was just the right age when the Beatles played Sullivan. I was all over that. Got electric guitar. That was fun. Between that and piano, we had a big old upright piano that was a player piano with the rolls in it. And so I was exposed to a lot of music. Neither of my parents played, but they had a great affection for music, so they kept a lot of records in the house, and then I started buying them myself. And AM radio back then, Albany was very unique in that because it was on the East Coast and because it was the capital of what was then the most populous state in the nation, it got a lot of FCC licenses for radio stations. And per capita, it had more radio stations than any other city in the United States at that time. So I would listen to the two rock stations, and they were separated on the dial, on the AM band. They were to either end, and in between them were all these other stations that were playing music that I hadn't heard before. I remember the first time I heard Aretha Franklin was an R&B station that was in Albany that I discovered. So I was very fortunate there. They used to play the top 40 every Friday, and a friend of mine and I used to listen to it. We'd play ping pong in his basement and listen on the radio to the countdown, and they would take, oh gosh, a good 2 hours to do it, 2-3 hours, because they play every song from top 40 down to number 1 at the end. And there'd always be this suspense of what was number 1 this week. I remember a few years ago going to the Billboard top 40 for just a random week in 1965. It was in April, I think. And I was just amazed, not only at how many different kinds of music were on the charts. There was Motown and British Invasion and Great American Bands, but also there was the fact that it was changing constantly. There were more songs coming in the top 40, great songs. So I realize now how lucky I was. There was just exposure to all sorts of music. Broadway, my parents were into Broadway. They used to go down to New York City on the train and see the latest productions and great musicals like My Fair Lady and Carnival, and they bought those records home. They used to sell the LPs at the theater. So they'd bring those home and I'd listen to them. So I got exposed to a lot of different music. I'm very, very fortunate.
Were you able to then transition into music as a full-time way to earn income?
Well, my response was pretty much, you would do anything for money that would get you around music. One of the challenges when I first came to Bloomington was the venues that were available for live music, they wanted to hear cover songs. And I was writing my own stuff. I wasn't that interested in just doing cover material. So the bands that I formed would play my songs. We played a couple songs, cover songs. But finding places to play, one thing that was a challenge is the venues that would support a full band with a rhythm section and electric plug-in and all that, they didn't have their own in-house sound systems. you had to bring your own sound system. So that was an added expense. And finding a place to rehearse, always a challenge. We were very fortunate there. There was a friend of mine who worked in a space where he had access overnight to this large empty room, and I got to use that for a while. Worked at used record stores, was on the radio playing music, all of that, just to keep close to what was going on, keep music in your head. So I think that's why I cultivated different ways to express myself, because ultimately it was different ways to make money. And there was never enough of it. It was never compensated in accordance with how many hours you put into it. And Jackson Browne says it very well. The only time that seems too short is the time we get to play. There's so much that builds up to that couple hours you're on stage and then after. So, yeah, it isn't efficient, but it was sustainable. I'm here. I got a lot done. That's important and impressive.
Let's talk about the first album that you released. When was that, and what was it called?
The very first album of originals that got released was A Well-Traveled Porch, and it was released by a little bluegrass label, Bell Buckle, in Tennessee. And this fella had this label, and he was operating out of Bell Buckle, Tennessee, which was a tiny small town where Charlie Louvin of the Louvin brothers lived. And Charlie Louvin was there. He saw us play. I still can't remember exactly how that happened. I was down in Nashville working with a publisher and playing out to showcase my tunes. And we wound up in Bell Buckle playing their live. They had a radio broadcast, live radio broadcast on a Saturday. And they contacted us and said, if you ever get to a point where you have a master of these songs, a good studio rendering of them, get in touch, we'll release it. So yeah, that was enough encouragement. And the individual I was playing with at the time was just myself and a fiddle player. I was playing guitar and piano and doing all original stuff. So my cohort, a woman named Nell Levin, she found a way to get us into a studio and record an album with a guy who had not only the studio but a lot of experience as a producer. He had done Sweethearts of the Rodeo and a few other country bands. So the album sounded country, but that was all right because that's what I was doing at the time. I was writing for publishers down there, trying to get stuff demoed and to other artists, and I was a bit of a maverick. The publishing company I was with was headed by a fellow named Roger Cook, and Roger was a songwriter who had written Long Cool Woman in the Black Dress for the Hollies, and he also wrote I'd Like to Teach the World to Sing, that Pepsi commercial. I think it was Pepsi, it might have been Coke. Anyway, he was British. He was an outsider in Nashville. So I think he saw me as a safe bet, and I was writing for them and then trying to showcase my songs at the numerous places you could play in Nashville. So it wound up that we recorded this album. Brent Truitt was the producer. He had a nice little studio, knew it very well. And then, of course, the fine studio musicians you get to play with. Brent knew everybody. And so a lot of the individuals who played on my album were A-list musicians. They were just outstanding. But those guys, I mean, I don't want to trivialize this because they're great talents, but there were so many people there who were outstanding on their instruments. You'd call them up, you'd try to choose off hours, which in Nashville for studio work is mornings and afternoons, because these guys would work late into the night in the A-list sessions they were doing, and sometimes would work all night and catch a few hours of sleep, and they'd never turn down work. If you had a date that they could make and you could pay them for it, and you were prepared, you couldn't waste time. That was one thing about Nashville. It was all business, and the individuals who worked there worked on the clock, and they were efficient. They would come in, these guys would come in. I'll give an example. We would have in the basic rhythm section, okay, so it would be rhythm, guitar, bass, and drums. Have it all set up, of course, the night before. Come in at 10 o'clock. Everybody was right on time. We'd run up the song through once, and then it'd say, okay, charts are all out there, go. One take, real clean. Do a second safety take, real clean. That's it, goodbye. It was 2 hours tops, and they were on to another session across town. So it was a unique way to work. I've never worked like that before or since. But it was very, very effective. Brent was a great producer. Nell, who I knew pretty well from playing, she was doing fiddle, and then the other musicians, wonderful people. I mean, just exceptional. And at one point, late in this session, Brent was able to solicit John Hartford to come in and play banjo on a tune. And it was lovely. He did a wonderful job. But again, same thing. Hartford knew exactly what to do, listened to the song once, had the chart. I don't even think he did 2 takes. He might have. Certainly didn't get any instructions from myself or Brent. Just did it. There it was. So, yeah, that was a good experience. And then I went back with Brent and did This Place, or Voice Beyond the Hill, which was the next album. And then I recorded This Place in Time here with the band I was playing with at the time. Carolyn Dutton was on that. Loretta, Jonna, it was the 4 of us. And then a few other musicians. Paul Mahern was an excellent producer, produced that one. And yeah, that worked out good. That got some really good reviews in Europe, and a lot of play on the radio there. That was a good experience. All my albums have been enjoyable. Always go in with more material than we need. So there was always more than we actually released, but that's part of it too. You always want that situation where you can pick and choose what songs sound good next to each other, if you have a good rhythm going in terms of particular type of tempo or whatever. You want to either break that up or keep that going. It's nice to have a lot of songs to choose from.
A Well-Traveled Porch made it to the top 25 on the Gavin Americana chart.
Yeah.
Voice Beyond the Hill introduced your work to European audiences, and This Place in Time received a 5-star review from Maverick. What do these milestones mean to you personally and creatively?
Well, it made sense to me that the Americana chart and the European response was in a distant orbit around country. Now, Americana is a combination of a lot of different styles, a little bit of blues, a little bit of folk, a little bit of country, and usually the way that it's produced is different than formula country, which was much more formula when I released them than it is now. But yeah, it made sense that it would find a home with Americana. And Americana as a genre was just starting to emerge. The Gavin chart had only been around for a year or two, maybe. So yeah, it got on the chart, got into the top 25. That was gratifying. Got a lot of play. It was nice to get the radio reports back. That's how they measured it back then, how many radio stations were playing it. And of course, these were small stations, and it's scattered all over the country, a lot of rural areas. And there were some good stories out of that. Stewed Cucumbers from the first album was played a lot in this town, Twisp, Washington. They had a little radio station. We're getting a lot of radio play from that. And we were never able to find out what the situation was. It was probably just a DJ who liked it and played the song a lot. But that's the basis how rock and roll started. You know, you had these DJs who would pick up a record and they'd spin it. Oh, I like that. Or somebody calls and says, that song you just played, what was that? So that's how something organically used to climb the charts. So that's how Americana was. There were only a few stations, maybe less than 100 stations nationwide. And then Europe, they were a little more flexible in the sense that they had country stations, in the sense that maybe one show that would play American music. And maybe they play a little bit of blues, or they play a little bit of country. And so Americana fit into that too. So I got a lot of radio play in Europe. And reviews too. So yeah, that's where the Maverick review came from. That was a British magazine, I think. And yeah, Europe has always had provided a safe haven for American artists historically. A lot of jazz artists from the 1950s, African American jazz artists especially, found a home in Europe because they were more open to these individuals and what they were playing, more progressive jazz, where they were having difficulty playing outside of really large markets in the United States. So that gave them another option. Same thing with other genres of music. Bluegrass, for instance, is extremely popular in Japan, of all places. And there are a lot of wonderful players that have come out of Japan, play fiddle, banjo, and that's surprising. It's very gratifying, I think, when you're able to translate what you're doing to another culture.
Can you tell us the story behind the song Hank's There and how it resonated with European country audiences?
Well, let's see. That was, I don't want to trivialize my writing experience in Nashville, because I worked with a lot of good publishers, but it was piecework, which is to say you're always trying to turn something out that you thought would catch somebody's interest, another artist's interest. So it modified maybe the subject matter that you would explore or the way that you would write a song. So I know that's where that came out of. But that was a song that I was writing. I thought, oh, this is a good idea. A song that is a tribute to Hank Williams Sr. And an excellent song. I was really pleased with the way it turned out and the way it turned out on the album. But the origin of the song itself was just a response to the market.
How has your songwriting process evolved over the years, and has your approach changed from your earliest work to now?
Oh, yeah. Well, the more you write, the more you write. I use fewer words than I used to. And that's because eventually, I think all writers get to this point where you start off when you're young just being attracted to what's popular, what your friends are listening to. The more you get into it, you start to understand that there are artists that preceded the ones that you're listening to, because those are contemporary. And then you branch out even further into people who, for instance, write songs that display an incredible amount of complexity in terms of the lyricism or the harmonization. The Great American Songbook. So I started working with Mike Lucas, who was, he played piano with Johnny Mathis and Nelson Riddle, icons of the Great American Songbook, and he knew how to do it on piano, just the harmonizations and the complexity of what he was doing. And he had a great love for these songs. You just mentioned a title and a key, he would be able to do it. He still plays, and he's amazing. So I'd listen to these songs, and I'd put them up on the lift. I'd figure, okay, this is a beautiful song. How is this harmonized? And I'd go to the piano and figure it out. It's like taking apart a little watch. How does it work? And I would do that constantly with these songs. And it affected my writing no matter what genre I was writing in. You start by being imitative, and then you start taking the principles, whether it is how a bridge is structured, or how you use interior rhyme within a line. And the initial wave of great American songwriting, going from maybe Stephen Foster, Oh Susanna and all that, through people like Irving Berlin, Cole Porter, Hoagy Carmichael, of course. Same thing. Johnny Mercer. These individuals knew what they were doing on such a high level of achievement that you look at their work and it's like a perfectly tailored suit. There isn't a stray thread anywhere, or a movie where every edit, never too long, just moves the narrative along perfectly. Being exposed to work like that, which you eventually are, you have to be. If you're making films, Spike Lee talks about the great directors that preceded him by decades. Whatever you're doing, if you're a visual artist, you're into Picasso, you're into who preceded Picasso. If you're a poet, you're into William Blake, you're into Rimbaud. All these individuals who are a century, at least, earlier than you're practicing. And sure, you start to understand, wow, this is the foundation of everything. So with singer-songwriting, you go back to individuals like Jimmy Rogers, and Hoagy Carmichael's an early songwriter, and Charlie Patton, and you understand, well, this is who Hank Williams was listening to. And a lot of obscure artists that people don't mention much anymore. Emmett Miller, who just had a very brief career, recorded in the 30s, and had an amazing voice. He didn't write, he was just used to yodel, and had an amazing range and a very interesting style, And you listen to his stuff, and it's like, oh my, I can see how Hank Williams would have been influenced by him, or Jimmy Rogers might have seen him play. It's wonderful. You use your imagination to understand the impact these great artists had.
Well, you've had the opportunity to share the stage with some of the greats, with John Prine, Lyle Lovett, Richard Thompson.
Yeah. Richard and Linda Thompson. That was their last tour together. Yeah, they came through Bloomington. They played at Second Story. It's where the Martini Bar is now, on the corner of 4th and College. And Rick Danko from the band, he was doing solo work. I opened for him once. One of the many manifestations of the Byrds. I can't remember who. McGuinn wasn't in it. Chris Hillman wasn't in it, but they still had the name, and there was one original member. I can't even remember who it was, but it was just a reformed group, and they played, opened for them one time. Yeah, it was great. Leo Kottke opened for him. Yeah, these are individuals that I'd listened to and admired. It was great to share the stage with them. Always different situation though. Sometimes you just kind of back into these things because they need somebody to open.
Did you ever have an experience with one that kind of exceeded expectations as to how they might be personally, or perhaps the other direction where they?
These individuals, I never. Everyone has their own personality, but everyone that I opened for was really gracious. I remember when we opened for Danko, it was after the band had broken up, and he came through town, and we opened for him. And you never expect that the artist's going to hang around to listen to you play. They're getting ready for whatever they're doing, or they're elsewhere. They walk in at 5 minutes before they're supposed to be on stage. But I noticed this guy in the back is moving back and forth and hopping up and down occasionally. And it was Danko. And we finished our set. It was a good set. And I had a bass player at the time, Rick Kinzer. Great bass player, a real quiet, contained fellow. And Danko came up right as we were getting ready to get off stage. We were just picking our instruments and unplugging, and he grabbed Rick Kinzer and got him in a bear hug, and just laughed with him for a couple minutes. It was very nice. I remember that. It was very sweet. It was nice to be able to create the circumstances where that would happen. Because, the band, what an amazing ensemble that was.
As a live performer, how do you use both music and storytelling to engage your audience?
Well, there's story in the songs. So when I'm introducing them, there is an advantage, I think, for me anyway, in a lot of the songs that I perform not having been recorded or distributed in a way that a lot of people would know them. So when I'm playing for audiences, and this is not a song that has been formally recorded, but simply published, and I have that situation, I can introduce the song with a story, because the song very often, not necessarily how it was written, but the content of I like stories for songs, and I've written a lot of story songs. So one feeds off the other. And yeah, as I said early in the interview, I was lucky. I hung around a lot of individuals. My grandfather, I probably sought them out to a certain degree, friends and so forth, who were very good storytellers. And it's like being able to tell a joke. There's a form to it, and timing to it. And very often it's not written down, it's just oral history. But having a situation where someone is comfortable doing that, using different characters and different plots and circumstances, it's a great education, because almost any experience that you encounter, you can translate through the lens of story. And I did that at a young age. I was really fortunate in that way. So that's one of the reasons I think I've worked so much in different media forms, because if that was Wilderness Plots is a good example, because that was an existing work. It was a book by Scott Russell Sanders, and it was a bunch of us different writers, and it was a suggestion that, okay, let's each, as an exercise, write songs from this book. Well, that was easy for me because I'd done so much hack work in Nashville, where you're just trying to produce something that you think will be viable for the marketplace, and you want to get it done and to your publisher and record it as a demo as quickly as possible. So, all right, what you hear a rumor, okay, so-and-so is making an album. They need songs. What do they want? What have they recorded in the past? What are they likely to respond to? So Wilderness Plots was a really nice opportunity, because it was the same thing. You pick out a character or a chapter, and okay, there's the song. You write it, and sure, I enjoy that a lot. I like working story into song, and I also like the idea of the way that newspaper columnists used to work, where every day when the newspaper would come out, you'd have a column, and it would be so many words. So you would have to come up with a compelling idea, do it on deadline, so it would be ready to set the type for the next day. So you don't have days to do this, you have hours to do this. And I always had great admiration for that. I think, wow, or a cartoonist, another example, a comic strip, how did these guys like Charles Schulz do that? Every day you've got to come up with some other idea, and you've got to execute it in a set amount of time. And the only thing that I had done in my life that I think was comparable to that, I worked with schedules to a certain degree with PorchLight in hometown, but one of my first paying jobs in media was I took over for a friend of mine who was an ad writer for a radio station back when they had such things. Commercial radio stations used to solicit advertisers, and they would produce the radio spot for them. They would write it, they would record it, they would broadcast it. So that was the incentive. Well, it would have to be 30 seconds long. You'd have to convey certain facts during those 30 seconds. And you'd have to write something that was not only literate, but entertaining. And you'd have to knock it out in a matter of maybe a couple days, work sessions, because you still had to record it. That was good training, because everything on PorchLight, for instance, is timed. I have a certain amount of time, and this has to do with music, I think. I've noticed that with Hometown and PorchLight and the songs that I write, the segments that I write are 2.5 to 3.5 minutes long. That's the way I construct them. And that's because I've always been used to that, even if it's a song, is right in that groove. And yeah, Hometown I did 450 some episodes of that, and those were all 3 minutes and 25 seconds long. That's exactly how long it needed to be with the introduction and the music bed that we had. So that was a certain word count. You had to be right in there. That's nice to use your imagination in that way.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Hometown, your long-running radio series on WFIU. How did the idea originate to focus on life in Terre Haute and the Midwest during the 1920s?
Well, the story is that I was in a bookstore, used bookstore, and I came across this book that was a book of historic photographs from Terre Haute, Indiana in 1900 to 1950. And I started paging through it. I'd never been to Terre Haute, it's only 60 miles from here. And I was paging through it, very compelling pictures. They almost looked like a movie set. You'd have the corner grocery store with the proprietor with the apron behind the counter, with a big wall of cans behind him, and Labor Day parades, and beautiful downtown scenes of Christmas shopping. I thought, wow. And I've never been to Terre Haute. This looks like a really interesting community. Well, I went, of course, and realized that these pictures, these businesses, these scenes were gone. That was from maybe the 1920s, and it had all changed. But I kept that in mind. I thought to myself, well, there's something of interest here that is compelling. It tells a story that's larger than Terre Haute. So sure enough, when I went back with a friend of mine who was a cartoonist, and we produced a little combination of my text and his cartoon, his artwork, about Terre Haute, and we published it in the Writer magazine. And then after that, I thought, well, maybe I can do something with audio here. So I was able to sell the idea to the public radio station, WFIU, and get some funding for it. And I just started writing these episodes. And it was a story. I wanted to keep it focused on a particular place and a time. So it was Terre Haute in the summer of 1926. And I did that, I think initially because I was convinced that there was a big change that happened in the United States in 1920. Was the first census that reported that more people were living in cities than in small towns and in rural areas. And I thought, well, that's very significant. And there was a huge rural influence in this city, Terre Haute, that you could still see. And I started writing these stories in the first person, like I was there. And it involved a lot of research, and go through miles and miles of microfilm of old newspapers. And I was lucky enough that when I did it, this goes back to about 30 years ago, I still was able to connect with people who were young adults in 1926. They were still alive. They were reaching the end of their lives. And I would talk to them. So I had all this material and wrote stories, and that's how that happened. And just kind of translated that experience of using imagination and the past to weave what I do for PorchLight as well.
You also created Memory Chain, a film series using panoramic photographs and narration. What sparked that concept, and what did those photos reveal to you as a storyteller?
Well, I was working with Suzanne Schwibs, who still teaches at the university. She was an excellent director, knew a lot about the camera, and we were charged to do a hour-long special for Hometown, that series, about Terre Haute. Because Terre Haute was one of the markets that WTIU was servicing. So it was on the television side of public broadcasting. So we had an hour-long special. And we created it, and it turned out really nice. Got nominated for an Emmy Award, and it was, we were really satisfied. We enjoyed working together. And so we were looking for another project, and we were able to, I suggested, since it was visual, it wasn't audio, I'd come across in my research for Hometown a store of what were called panoramas or circuit photographs. They used to be, you can see them occasionally, they used to be you would take it with a particular camera that would scan the image, and you would develop it, and it would be a long format photograph that would come out of this. And very often they used it for like military battalions where they were all lined up and like 100 people, but they were able to scan it all into one photograph. And it was technology that was popular in the 1920s. And so that resonated with me. And we found that there was this studio, local studio in Terre Haute, that had a number of negatives that were at the State Museum. They had been donated to the State Museum, and they were in storage at Crane Naval Depot because they didn't have the facilities to store these negatives, which were very fragile. There were plates in many cases. They didn't have a climate-controlled area that was secure enough. So Crane Naval Depot agreed to take them and put them in storage. Well, what happened was that eventually the Indiana Historical Society moved to a new facility that had more storage. And they got in touch with Crane, and they still had these negatives. So they sent them up to the Indiana Historical Society, and I was working with somebody up there. I used to go up to the library occasionally, the library, and do research. And she mentioned this to me because it was a Terre Haute studio who had generated all these circuit, C-I-R-K-U-T, circuit photographs. And all they had, it was just the image and a title. So they were interested in inventorying them. So the woman said to me, well, you can come up while I do this, and you can see these images because I have to inventory them anyway. And I went up with her. I would drive up and look at them, and I'm thinking, well, maybe we can do something creative here. So I contacted Suzanne. I said, would you be interested in collaborating with me to do this series. It wouldn't be long, it would be something that would probably only be 5 minutes long, if that. And I would write a narrative, and we would pick out certain other images if we could, and just make a very small, contained film. And maybe a dozen of them. So we were able to get support for that. But what happened was that they turned out great. I was really pleased. We got through, I think, 8. And then Suzanne, of course, it always takes longer than you think it will. Suzanne had another commitment, creative commitment, that she needed to start. So she said, we have enough support for another 4. So if you can find technical support for this, do it, go ahead. And I did. There's a fellow who, again, still works at the university, works with TIU for their sports production, a lot of their sports production, David Gonzalez, and a student intern. And we were able to do it. We were able to finish the 4. So I think there are a dozen of them, maybe. And I'm really pleased with the way they turned out. It was a little window into community, how people used to gather, whether it was for company picnics or clubs. They would use this format to document where they were in place and time. So yeah, it was a lovely creative experience. I loved working with Suzanne. She was a lot of fun and very knowledgeable behind the camera. It was fun working with her.
In 2018, you began PorchLight with Tom Roznowski, a weekly radio series also on WFIU. How does PorchLight differ in tone and approach from Hometown?
Oh, well, it's an hour long for one thing. It's not 3 minutes and 25 seconds. And the reason that happened was I was having lunch with a good friend of mine, Tim Lloyd, and we both had a deep affection for Afterglow, which was a program. It's still on. It's on its 3rd or 4th host now, but its very first host was a gentleman by the name of Dick Bishop. And I learned a lot from him. Man, what a great radio host he was. He used to have this music show where he'd play music from the Great American Songbook. And just personable, intimate, I learned so much about how to be a radio personality from Dick Bishop. He was outstanding. Great guy, too. So I was learning at his feet, and Tim used to love the show, too. And we were just talking about it one time. Dick had stopped doing the show, and I wondered aloud, Tim and I wondered aloud, whether there were tapes or audio of those programs, because they'd stopped running it. They had translated to another host, and it was a fine show, but we were wondering, because we had such great memories of listening to Dick Bishop on summer evenings. He used to be on 8 o'clock on a Friday. And I thought to myself, well, I know enough people at the station. I'll just ask, and maybe they have something in their archives. So I went and talked with the station manager, and I said, well, do you have anything? And he said, well, yeah, I think we have maybe 144 shows. I said, well, that's great. I'd love access to it. And, maybe it'd be a good idea if, because Dick Bishop used to play songs that were deep in the catalog, not a lot of artists and songs that people would be familiar with. And then he'd educate you. He'd say, well, these are the musicians that played on this date on April 15th, 1943. And this song was written by so-and-so. And it was very illuminating. I learned so much from it. So I said, well, here's an idea. We'll just take, this would be about 3 minutes. We'll just play the song, And then Dick Bishop is going to backsell it on the other side of it. And we'll just edit that part, and we'll create a number of programs. And you can use it as what we call a modular. You know, if a certain half-hour show has like a 5-minute gap at the end, you stick it in there. They still do modulars occasionally, not as often as they used to. And that was the point. Once I explained this to John, my idea, he said, well, that's great, but modulars are too difficult to program now because everything is done by computer. So would you be interested in maybe making this part of a longer show? And I said, well, maybe, but I don't know what else would go with it. So then I started thinking about other segments that I could put around that. And I did. It became an hour-long show. At first it was going to be a half hour, and I was it took a long time to get to that point. And I brought it to John Bailey, who was the executive producer, and he said, well, this is really good, but we're having trouble programming half hours too. It needs to be an hour. So I said, okay, give me some time, and we finally got a format together that I was pleased with, and we've been doing it 8 years now. 7, 8 years. I think we started in 18, didn't we? Yeah, that's 7 years. And we just finished our 100th episode. So that's been a nice ride. It's been a good creative experience because I get to play music. And of course, one of the advantages of that is that you get to listen to music. You have to listen to music. Well, that's where I started. You know, when I was a kid, you know, you just listen, you get curious, and you're inspired, and you heard something you never heard before, and there's that thrill of discovery, and sure, so I get to have it all over again. So that's nice, circle completes itself.
You've expressed yourself through music, radio, print, and film. Do you feel like one medium is the best vehicle for a story or idea?
Well, yeah, a lot of it, I think I mentioned this in the beginning, is opportunities come about. I don't want to make it sound crass, but you see an opportunity for a project that is going to involve support and collaboration with people, and it's an opportunity to create, and you think that the support that you're going to have is both committed and professional. If you have that in place and you hold up your end, something's going to emerge from it. And hopefully it'll be something worthwhile that you'll care about and identify with. So I've noticed this with singer-songwriters. The old joke is every actor wants to be a director. And you could extend that, every singer-songwriter wants to be an actor. Because there's so many singer-songwriters that Dolly Parton, Willie Nelson, Chris Christopherson, Tom Waits, Lyle Lovett, who have been actors as well. And it's a different way of expressing yourself, but they have a head start because they have already acted at being singer-songwriters and stage personalities. And some are more comfortable with it than others. It's always surprising to me. John Denver was in Oh God, and he was very good. You know, he carried the film with George Burns, I thought, very well. And I think for myself, all these different means of expressions are valid to me, and I am able to represent myself well enough that I don't get reluctant to create or express, and I have confidence that what's going to turn out is going to be meaningful and find an audience. And so, yeah, the different means of expressions very often are just the opportunities that come along at a certain time. That acting is not something that has fascinated me outside of the fact that actors, as my sweetheart Trish always says, actors have got to act. So if you're offered a movie and it's a part, and you how do you identify with it? Is this Shakespeare? No, maybe it's an action film, but it's something that compensates you. Maybe you like some of the other actors in it. Maybe there's something that tickles your fancy in terms of how you grew up as a kid. Oh, I've always wanted to play blank, so here's my opportunity. Yeah, and you respond to it. And I find that's one of the things that Bob Dylan did. Bob's done so many things. He's a great songwriter, and of course has a presence in music, but he's also acted in films, he's also written books, he also does art, sculpture and visual art. He is constantly creating, and that's not only admirable but attractive. It gets you to use your creative brain in different ways. So no, I wouldn't say that there's anything more valid or comfortable to me than another. It really is. I'm not a parent, but I imagine parents, when they have they look at their children, they see different parts of themselves in every child. And it's not like they have a favorite. They see themselves expressed in that child and in that life in a way that is familiar to them. Same thing with me.
Well, you've lived just a short walk from the graves of Hoagie Carmichael and Ross Lockridge Jr. in Bloomington. How does being surrounded by that legacy influence your perspective on Indiana's cultural story?
Well, I believe in thin places. That term, thin places, they applied to like Stonehenge and the spiritual Mecca. Places on the earth that have a spiritual resonance to them. And I believe that's true. That you step on certain sacred ground and there's something. New Harmony is like that in southern Indiana. I found Terre Haute to be that way. There's just something that resonates from the ground up that is vibrational, and it captures your attention. And in Bloomington, I think that the spirit of those two individuals you mentioned, Ross Lockridge and Hoagie Carmichael, are very present. I picked that up on Hoagie early when I was here, and I couldn't really articulate it in words. It's just an energy. And I thought it was really interesting that when, this goes back probably 10 years maybe, when Bob Dylan came to play at the auditorium one time, it was after the sound check, and they had assigned a student to him. I think the union board was sponsoring the concert, just to make sure he had everything he needed. And after the sound check was over, the union board representative was going to drive him back to his room, and he said to them, "Oh, I hear Hoagie Carmichael is buried here." And the representative, the student, gratefully knew who Hoagie Carmichael was. So asked a few questions, found out he was buried up at Rose Hill. So Dylan says, "Oh, I'd like to go see that." So she drove him up there, and thankfully they have a little office there. So they found out where the grave was and took Dylan over there. And he was respectful. I don't know much about the story past that point, but he wanted to make a pilgrimage to the gravesite. So he felt it. I think that thin places have a real potential to connect with your soul, and if you're really fortunate, the people that you meet resonate and touch your soul. You form relationships with them, and I think that's also true of places where you live. If you're really fortunate, you get to find, all it takes is one. I've had a couple, but find a thin place where you can live for a period of time. In Indiana, there are plenty of places I've visited in Indiana like that, but yeah, Bloomington's definitely there. I feel Hoagie, I feel a lot of the great individuals who came through here, either playing live dates or the tremendous wellspring of talent that has come through this city. Some people I've known, some people I've just heard about, but it's present.
What advice would you offer to someone who wants to pursue music, writing, or creative storytelling in Indiana?
Well, I wouldn't suggest to anybody that they look at my life and try to cop licks, because I can't. That's like instructions or suggestions on who to fall in love with. What do you know? It's personal, and there are very few things that are more personal. You could spiritual practice and love are deeper than creative expression, I think. But I'll take it from the other side. If you got to create, you're going to do it regardless, or die not trying. You can die trying. That happens. Otis Redding and Jim Croce and Buddy Holly went down in planes, and Nick Drake took an overdose of pills, and Charlie Parker got strung out and died in his 30s, and you can die trying. You can die trying, but you can die from not trying too. Because if you don't try, if it's in you to do that, you might as well get at it. It's not going to be easy. It might cause you suffering. You may cause suffering to people around you that you love. That's possible. But that's the risk. Everything involves risk. Stepping off a curb involves risk. So, yeah, you don't, as they say in Buddhism, death is certain, the time of death is uncertain. You don't know, you're not writing the script. So, yeah, I don't have any suggestions or wisdom to anybody, except that if they feel they need to express what they're seeing and experiencing in life, what they've learned from others, creatively, you best do it. Because if you don't do it, those moments at 3 a.m. when you wake up and you're looking at the ceiling and you're facing the next day, or you're remembering the day that just passed, won't be pleasant. You need to be at peace with yourself on some level. Not that creative work brings you peace. There is no peace. And I think peace is overrated personally. It is underachieved globally. There should be far more peace available to far more people. But within one's soul, there is no peace. There is no peace. All the spiritual teachers will say this. It is not an easy road. There are no maps. There are challenges. There need to be challenges. Of course, it's hard. It has to be hard. And that's not unfair. That's just asking a lot out of you. And how great that you're alive to have a lot being asked of you. How great that somebody's asking. Get to it.
What do you hope people take away from your body of work?
I didn't think about this one. You know, ultimately, there's a great story that the British actor Peter O'Toole tells about a leather jacket that he had, and he used to wear it when he went out partying, and he used to party a lot. So he had this leather jacket that had beer and vomit and tears, and got into scrapes with it, and an old leather jacket. He finally decided at one point, well, I better get this dry cleaned. So he sends it to a dry cleaner, Sycamore Dry Cleaners in London. And it comes back to him after a few days with a little note in the pocket that says, "It distresses us to return work that is not perfect, because there's only so much they could do to clean it." And I think about that line a lot. Eventually, you never know. Great Irish poets talk about your last afternoon. Do you know it's going to be your last afternoon? Probably not. In most cases, no. You're just living. And you get to a point, those self-winding clocks, alarm clocks, where you wind them and they tick, and then eventually they slow down and they stop ticking. You have to wind them again. Well, you go through a life. This is how you spent it, and this is what you manifested, and the people you affected, and the people who affected you. And it's not like it's all written down or documented, but eventually you get through it. And there's another side to that wonderful note that was left in Peter O'Toole's leather jacket pocket. It distresses us to return work that is not perfect. The other side of it is that I am so grateful to be able to have created the work I have. And it's been a real privilege. I understand how incredibly lucky I am, because you think about it on so many levels, how much good fortune one has to be born at a particular time, to be raised in the family that you're raised, to have the loves that you do in your life, and that's multi-layered. So those are the important things. The work I create, that's on a lower level. That's not essential to the quality of life, mine or anybody else's. It's just work that I produced. That's it. And there are so many ways to do that creatively that don't involve putting words on a page or strumming a guitar or making a chord on a piano. There are many ways to do that, and I'm deep admiration, not only people who do it creatively, different ways of creative expression, but I'm also just, you see people's lives and what they create in them. And I can't help but be just in awe, impressed. How do people survive most of the things they get through? How do people articulate the heartbreak and survive it? How do people embrace the responsibilities that they have for raising children, for showing up and being effective and efficient at a job or a vocation? I don't know. I know about my life, but it creates a wellspring of great affection and awe. And I'm fortunate to have witnessed it as much as I have. The fact that I've turned some of that witness into something that is creative or entertaining is just a way that I spent time.
Are there stories or reflections you'd like to share that we haven't already covered?
No. I may have told enough stories. It's always something I ask myself. We're talking there about the last afternoon. Eventually, you also get to the last sentence, or the last line of a song that you wrote, and man, I can't think of anything that's more dispensable than that. Yeah.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for sharing your amazing Indiana music story with us today. Your contributions to Indiana's musical and cultural history are deeply appreciated, and we are honored to preserve your story for future generations.
Thank you, Spence. It was a pleasure to talk with you.